every now and again, I'll have one of these little goo puddings as a sweet treat. These chocolate ones are pretty good, but my favourite are those little key lime pies. They are really, really good. These guys changed their packaging a year or two ago, but if you picked up a packet before then, here's what you would have read on the back. It said, "Pleasure is everything. Give in to happiness. Reject propriety. Embrace variety. Prudence is so 1658. Life is fleeting. Clasp it hard with both hands. Seek delight. Trust your impulses. Ordinary is pointless. Break free." And then it finished with the rallying cry, "All hail the goo decadence." I've been wondering if these guys might go back to their old packaging over the next few months because, well, as the lockdown restrictions start to ease again, we'll be able to enjoy so many of the things that we used to take for granted. After all, when box sets are all we've had to binge on for the past few months, I'm sure that lots of us can't wait to be decadent in enjoying all sorts of other pleasures. And if we do that, well, we'll be in good company because that's exactly what the teacher did. We've been learning from this enigmatic character's wisdom across these videos, looking at the Bible's answers to the questions of lockdown life. And here's how the teacher approached the good things in life. He writes, "I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." And we think, exactly, that is just what I'm going to do as soon as these restrictions are gone. But what he has to say next, well, that may just be the pin that bursts our bubble. Because he said this, "That also proved to be meaningless." The teacher, he says that looking for satisfaction in pleasure, ultimately it's meaningless, it's pointless, it's impossible, it's just something that cannot be done. Which is why we want to ask the question, will everything be better when I can just enjoy things again? Or is in fact the teacher right? Are there any pitfalls of pleasure? Well, maybe you're not quite ready to concede that things aren't going to get better as soon as we can start enjoying things again. Maybe you're thinking that this killjoy, the teacher, was looking in all the wrong sorts of places for pleasure. So why don't we have a look and see exactly what it is that he did? "Laughter," I said, "is madness. And what does the pleasure accomplish?" Well, as soon as the big venues reopened, what did the teacher do? He went up to Hammersmith to watch Live at the Apollo being recorded, and then after that he went back home to watch endless videos of cats doing ridiculous things on YouTube. And yet all that amusement doesn't do anything for him. And so he does what many of us do when we're feeling a bit lost. He goes to the pub. He writes this, "I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives." Well, the big night out hasn't helped him very much, has it? Embracing folly wasn't the answer. And so he comes up with a new plan. He says, "I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. And do you see what he did? As well as pursuing pleasure, he also went after projects and possessions. And what he's described there, they're the things that he did 3,000 years ago in Jerusalem. But I've been thinking, what if the teacher lived in our day? What if he lived in London as we're coming out of lockdown? What would have been the things that he would have tried? Or maybe he'd have done the following. I undertook great projects. I kept a crash pad in town while renovating a place in the countryside, a listed cottage, beautiful grounds. I filled my wine cellars with the best of the old world and of the new world. My advisors invested in the best stocks and shares, and I beat the market at every twist and turn. My personal shopper kept me on trend. My personal trainer kept me in shape. I spent my summers island hopping in the Caribbean and my winters skiing out of a chalet in Chamonix. The weekends were spent visiting the top cities of Europe. I became greater by far than anyone in London before me. Maybe that's what the teacher would have got up to if he was in London coming out of lockdown today. And maybe you sort of smile a bit when you hear that and you think, well, that would be lovely, but that's just not me. I'm much more of a small pleasures person. Give me one of those goo pots, help me find a bargain in a charity shop, even just get me a nice new haircut and I'd be happy. Well, here's the problem if you're a small pleasures person. Here's what goes wrong. When our small pleasures don't satisfy us, we start to believe a lie. And we believe the lie that says, if only I had a bit more, or could do a bit more, or had achieved a bit more, if I just had more, then I would be happy. Whereas the teacher, well, he couldn't say that. He had plumbed the depths of pleasure. He left no stone unturned in his all-out, money's no object, want for nothing, self-indulgence. For the teacher, there's none of those things. No, if I had more. No, if I could do more. No, if I had achieved more. He can't say that. As he says, I denied myself nothing my heart desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. He went big. And so when he draws a conclusion about pleasure, well, we know it must be the final word. And what is it he concluded? He says this, my heart took delight in all my labour. This was the reward for all my toil. The teacher says it was brilliant in the moment. I really enjoyed myself. And yet he also says this, when I had surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. For the teacher, it's a case of short-term gain, long-term pain, because he couldn't find a single pleasure that satisfied him, and he tried everything. His pleasure, it was like breath on a cold winter's morning. You know what it's like, you breathe out, it's there for a moment, and then it's gone. The breath, the pleasure, it's so fleeting that he describes it as meaningless. And I guess we all know what this is like, don't we? Because as soon as one pleasure passes, well, we just start looking for the next best thing. I've got a couple of mates who work as travel agents, and in normal times, their busiest week of the year is just after Christmas. Think about that for a moment. The week after the most indulgent season of the whole year. And what are we doing? We're desperately lining up our next pleasure hit. Isn't that mad? Don't we ever learn? Pleasure doesn't satisfy. Maybe we shouldn't be hailing the goo decadence after all. Maybe pleasure isn't everything. Yes, life is fleeting. But no, we don't grasp it with both hands by seeking delight. You see, here's what the teacher has to say. He says, the pitfall of pleasure is that the fun never lasts. So what? What do we do with that? Does that mean there's no point in enjoying anything? Should we just withdraw from the world, abandoning anything that's pleasurable? Well, no, the teacher wouldn't have us do that. In fact, he says quite the opposite. He says this: a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? Here's what the teacher says. He says, the things we have are gifts, good things that God has given us. And he says that when we get our heads around this, when we grasp that our pleasures, our projects, our possessions aren't the things that we've earned or things that we're entitled to, but rather gifts that have been freely given to us by a generous God. When we get that, we're free to really enjoy them. And when we get this, pleasure's fleeting nature suddenly doesn't matter so much. Let me give you a trivial example. My wife and I, we have 3 young kids, and since we've had children, we've stopped using salt in all our cooking because it's better for young children not to have too much salt in their diet. And most of the time, do you know what? I don't really notice it. I'm okay with no salt in my food. But one thing I really, really miss is salted butter. And so a couple of years ago, when I got some really nice French salted butter and some crusty white bread in a Secret Santa, I was over the moon. It was the best gift I had that year. Now, I knew that block of butter wasn't going to last forever. It was a fleeting pleasure. I knew it wasn't going to change the way we were going to cook and everything have salt in again. I knew all that. And yet knowing that freed me to really enjoy that gift. You see, when our pleasures and our projects and our possessions come along and come to fruition, the teacher says, accept them for what they are, gifts from God. And that if you do that, you are free to truly enjoy them. It's a game-changing approach to pleasure. Receiving enjoyment as a gift from God, it's a bit like eating a really good bit of watermelon. It is refreshing and enjoyable. It is so good. But trying to do what the teacher did, trying to seek satisfaction in pleasure, to find fulfillment in the fun, that's like using a watermelon as the ball in a game of football. Things get very messy very quickly, and we get hurt. But if we enjoy the good things in life in the way the teacher describes, well, at first it will revolutionize our leisure. And secondly, it will make it easier for us to receive God's greatest gift to us, and that is Jesus Christ. There are all sorts of benefits to receiving God's gift of his son Jesus. But for now, let me just mention just one for anyone who is tempted to test themselves with pleasure as the teacher did, even if you know that pleasure will just be fleeting. And here's what I want to share. It's a verse from one of the Psalms that describes the future of all those who receive God's good gift of Jesus. And the psalmist, he's talking to God and he says this: "You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasure at your right hand." Do you see what the psalmist is saying? He's saying for all those who receive God's good gift of Jesus, there is a future, not of fleeting pleasure, but of eternal pleasure in knowing him. I don't know about you, but that sounds so much better than that breath-like enjoyment that might be just around the corner as lockdown lifts. What does the teacher have to say to us? He says, hey, enjoy the good gifts that God gives you. Appreciate that post-lockdown haircut. Look forward to having your friends round for dinner once more, to being able to be part of a crowd at a gig again, or get along to some live sports. Even plan something ambitious to do as we come out of lockdown. Because our pleasures and our projects and our possessions, they are all good things to enjoy, even if they're only passing. Enjoy those good gifts, but don't miss out on the greatest gift. Don't miss out on God's gift of Jesus Christ to you. Because with him, there are eternal pleasures to enjoy. And that is something that is not frustrating or not fleeting, something to really look forward to.